Hello, hello. It is M.E.C. and this is the Well-Being Podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Today we're talking about the concept of being present. And I'm putting that in air quotes because I swear I hear this all the time and it low-key makes me very frustrated sometimes. But I get it, but I also don't. And when people say be present, it's as if it's the easiest thing in the world, as if inhabiting your body in space, being completely aware of everything that's going on, taking in beautiful things, taking in not so beautiful things, feeling what my body feels like, being aware of my emotions, what's going on in space around me is very easy to do. It's not. That's a lot of sensory information for me to process at once. Kind of overwhelming, one. I think in general what people mean by be present is to be aware of where you are in space and time and to take account of your emotions and the way that your physicality, like your physical body, feels at the time. But the problem with that is that I don't think we are trained or, raised to pay attention to that kind of thing. Like, we don't do that. I think it's really difficult when we're idolizing this concept as if it's really easy, but we've been purposefully trained not to do that. And what I mean, like, not right to do that, when we're kids, we're taught to take in certain sensory information as important and then discard the rest. I take in things that are due tomorrow, things that my parents want me to do, things that my teacher needs to get done, things that I want, like from a toy store or something like that. But other stuff I don't deem as important. Like the first time you see like a ladybug, it's like super cool and you're super excited about it and you're taking in all this sensory information about it. But after you've seen it a couple times, yeah, that's not important anymore. I've seen what it looks like. It loses its whimsy. It's not as interesting. And then suddenly it becomes part of the background. I don't pay attention to it anymore. And I think I also started doing that with my emotions and like the way I feel. Let's be honest. When you're a kid, a lot of the time, the way that you feel is not prioritized. It's not important to adults because it is considered either in the way of what's being trying to be done, or there's just too many kids to take account of everybody's emotions at the time, so the people who, had the most extreme responses got responded to, and if you were like kind of in the middle or like on the down low kind of thing, it just wasn't paid attention to. So your emotions and the way that you felt were just kind of left at the wayside. So then you stop paying attention to it as much. And now, to this day, I find it very difficult when my therapist asks me, well, how do you feel about that? I don't know. I've not been trained to know what I feel like, to be honest with you. And it's kind of silly that something as basic as emotional recognition is so difficult for adults, for grown adults like myself. It's funny, it's comical. It's weird. So what I'm saying is the concept of being present is not so easy because we are just not trained or raised or taught to do that. It's not a priority for us. And I want to break that down a little bit further because I think it's really easy to get frustrated with a lot of wellness media saying that being present is the key to happiness when you don't know how to do it because it's really difficult for you to do and you don't understand why is it just so hard for me to be in the moment. Well, I'll tell you why, at least from my perspective. Number one is probably the concept of delayed gratification. From the time that we're really young, I think we are conditioned to think about delayed gratification as this amazing concept, or at least something that we should live by. All the work that we're putting in now is going to pay off later. And I think as a immigrant kid, that became one of my mottos. Like I remember thinking that internally, all these kids are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and I'm trying to do my best so that I can get into the best university I can later, so that I can get the job I want later, so I can make my parents proud later. And I don't think you have to be an immigrant to share experiences like that. I grew up in the United States. They do a really good job at making you believe in this concept of putting in work now, suffering now potentially, and then reaping the rewards later. And I still believe in this to a degree. I just don't put it on a pedestal the way that I used to. I think there's a healthy balance. I can be heavily invested with feeling good now, or at least not suffering, making sure I take care of myself, and doing hard things that are difficult for my future. But I don't want to sit there and suffer or not take care of myself so that I can reap the benefits later. Because if I'm not living now, listen, unfortunately, like the future, like that whole concept is not necessarily guaranteed. And I think I really got a big grasp of that in my 20s when I was working a job that I hated every day because I was thinking about how good it would look on a medical school application. And I hated every second of this job. The only parts I didn't dislike was working with patients because I think patients are so nice. But besides that, I hated this job. And I thought it was just like, struggle through it. It's giving you character. You're going to do fine. And then once you get out on the other side, you'll be so glad you did it. I was traumatized by this job. And people just kind of train kids and teenagers and young adults to believe in this concept of work really hard. If you're suffering, it doesn't matter. I love the work hard part. Love that. And I still abide by it. I don't think that your suffering should be cast aside. It's important. And frankly, the concept of delayed gratification, if it has to rely on if you're suffering acutely and in pain and it doesn't matter or your emotions don't matter, yeah, that's problematic to me. I think we kind of have to redefine the way that we teach kids delayed gratification because we get rewarded for thinking forward. When you're a kid, one of the things that people always ask you is, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't think that that's a harmful question, don't get me wrong, but we are already kind of training kids to look to the future because we want to know what they're going to do. We don't really care what they're doing now because we're like, well, what can you do? You're a kid. And we do see kids who are super impressive, who are prodigies, who are athletes, people who are really good at something beyond what you would expect for their age. We're obsessed with them. We're obsessed with them. Isn't that so strange? I feel like it feels weird. And then I remember thinking, like, when you watch the Olympics, I think a lot of people feel this way. You look at the Olympics and you see how young the people are who are performing all of these amazing physical acts. And you think, wow, I have done nothing with my life compared to these people, which is obviously not true. You've done tons and tons of things, and we just compare ourselves because that's what we do best, I suppose. In addition to this concept of being obsessed with the future, which makes it very difficult to be present, we're super obsessed with like the next new thing. When we're thinking about where we are now, I think a lot of people are like, well, that's great, you're doing this, but what's next? What's your next step? After you get a promotion, I feel like people already start looking automatically to the next promotion. It's this obsession with, you can't be content with what's going on now, otherwise you'll be stagnant, which is also a weird concept. So that's kind of the entire sphere of delayed gratification, why I think from the get-go, it becomes hard for people to be comfortable with the concept of being present if they were raised in a society that was really obsessed with the future and delayed gratification. And it even manifests in things like planning obsessions, the fact that we associate people who are organized and who are well put together and who are successful with being immensely good at planning. By planning, they have some sort of stability because they know what's going to happen next. And it's because we dislike uncertainty. We love concrete things. Can't lie, I'm one of those people. I like to plan out my to-do list. I hate uncertainty, and I like the concept of stability. I think it's this lovely concept. But when you become super obsessed with it, and then my to-do list is actually running my day because I'm like behind on all the things I have on my to-do list, and I'm thinking, oh, I can't start anything because I'm anxious looking at this list of all the stuff I have to do, then I think it becomes pathologic. It's kind of a give and take here. I'm not saying that any of these things in themselves are not great, but I think we often take it to extremes. And then there's the concept that it is really hard for us to be in the moment even when we try, even when we're aware of the fact that it's difficult. And it's because we love being distracted. It's uncomfortable to sit with thoughts. Listen, if I had to sit with my thoughts for more than 20 minutes in a dark room with no other stimuli, no, I'm not interested. I'll be honest, that gives me anxiety. Because I don't know, we're just so used to taking in other sensory information, and so just being with our own mind is uncomfortable. And that's another podcast episode that I'm going to be talking about, which is why are thoughts from within so uncomfortable to sit with. But it's that, and it's the fact that we have so many things to do, and the fact that just being in the moment is not really prioritized. It's not been taught, it's not been rewarded like planning has, like thinking about the future has, like catastrophizing low-key has. And so when I think about all these things, no wonder it's hard for us to be present. No wonder I get irritated when I open up my Instagram feed and I see someone saying, well, all you have to do is be present and you'll be much happier. Well, that's a really difficult first step, I'm gonna be honest with you. Because if you have anxiety, and if you get rewarded for planning and for being obsessed with the future and for catastrophizing and making sure that everything else is okay, because maybe you've been put in a position where you've had to take care of other people and you have to worry about the contingencies that could possibly happen, well then yes, you get rewarded for catastrophizing and worrying and thinking about the future, and we're really good at being anxious people. I'm really good, by the way, at being an anxious person. And so it's hard. Being present is hard. Being in the moment is hard. I have been toying with different ways that I can ground myself in like the experience of living, being more aware of what's going on. And I have to be very intentional about it because I don't remember to do that all the time. I don't think anyone remembers to do that all the time. I think if you did, you probably wouldn't get a lot done, if I'm being honest with you. So I think of very specific times when I can enact mindfulness in my life. So for instance, when I do my face care routine, when I wash my face, I think a lot about the way that it feels. I'm a very sensory person, and so like when I focus on the way that something feels on my skin, it helps me to ground myself in the moment. And for some people it's auditory, for some people they can do that with thoughts really well. And I think you have to think about the ways that you interact with the world in a very immersive way. For me, it's touch, or the way that something feels. That's how I become like immersed in the world. And so I want you to really think about the things that make you feel good and what it is about those things that make you feel good sensory-wise, because I think that can help. I think sensory information is very important to the way that we ground ourselves. So when I'm washing my face, I'm thinking about the circles I'm making when I'm washing my face. I'm thinking about also like the consistency of what I'm putting on my face, what it feels like before and after. I think of all of those things, texture-wise, and I think it helps me to slow down and really get to like the very basis of what I'm doing. That's super helpful to me. Another thing that I find myself really grounded in is when I go on a walk. So I focus on the way that my feet feel when I'm like walking in the park. And if there's a breeze, listen, I'm gonna be in the moment when I feel a breeze. I don't know why, but the way that like wind or like a gentle breeze feels on my face in particular, that will make me very aware of where I am and being grateful for the feeling of it, even if it's cold, even if it's like really bitter cold. For some reason, I find that to be a very pleasant experience that makes me think, wow, I'm alive, I'm on a walk, this is what I'm doing right now. It's insert this time, it's this place. I just become very aware of where I am. I also feel very grounded when I'm drinking tea. I try to really slow down the entire process of drinking tea, to bringing out the glass, putting the glass down. What does it sound like when they put the glass down? Picking out the tea. What does it feel like to rip open the container that the tea is in and placing it in? I really take it meticulously, and I make that a very immersive experience for me because it's something I know how to do and I do on autopilot very easily. But by paying attention to the individual steps and the way that it sounds in the entire experience, I think that is really therapeutic. And I actually have, for this mini meditation that I'm going to have accompanying this podcast, is a ASMR experience of me making tea, and I hope you really, really enjoy it. It's us sharing tea together, so that's just something to look forward to if you also listen to the mini meditations that come with this podcast. And the last sensory experience that I feel really aware and grounded is a feeling when you're really tired after a long day, which has been me recently because I've been working for 11 hours a day. And when you get into your bed underneath your sheets and you like put your head down on your pillow and you feel whatever sheets you have or your blanket settle on your body, that the way that that feels, that is very grounding to me. And so these are small points throughout my day that happen every day for the most part, that I'm very aware of where I am in space. I know what I'm doing. I can check in with myself. And I think I have to add a new practice, which is when I feel those things, how am I feeling? I often only check in at the end of the day with how I'm feeling, which gives me a lot of emotional whiplash because I'm not really taking account of how am I feeling at different points throughout the day. When my stress was really high at this point, was I really checking in to see how I was feeling? Was I frustrated? Was I overwhelmed? Was I sad? Was I anxious? Like, how was I feeling? I don't think I really do that. And so that's something I want to challenge myself to do, is that throughout these experiences that I've determined are grounding for me already, like naturally, can I add in a skill that I find difficult, that I need to be intentional about, which is checking in with myself emotionally as a part of the grounding process. So that's something that I want to encourage you to do this week, is finding experiences throughout your day that you naturally find to be grounding. And when I say grounding, I mean sometimes it feels to me like I'm in a music video because it feels weirdly serene for a normally busy day, or for what should normally be mundane. It feels special for some reason. That's the kind of sensation or feeling we're looking for. And if you can't find those feelings throughout the day, that's okay. You can make them. My mom always used to have me, when I started speaking really quickly, and she noticed I was getting very anxious or worked up about something that I was talking about, she would make me put my feet on the floor and wiggle my toes and feel my feet on the floor, and focus on the sensation of whatever is supporting you right now. So maybe if you're in a chair, if you're in a wheelchair, if you're standing on your feet, whatever is connecting you to the ground or supporting you, focus on your connection with that thing or that item. And that's really a very basic way of grounding yourself that I find to be helpful, that my mom taught me. So that might be one of the ways that you do it. But I think it's also really nice to discover ways in your life that you're already experiencing that feeling, that human feeling. When you're in the music video, you hear the music in your head, it feels special for some reason. That's what I'm talking about, that feeling. And I want to close out this with the caveat that there's going to be times when it's difficult to be present, when it's probably impossible to feel present. Things like grief if you've lost somebody, or if you're mourning a relationship that didn't go so well. I don't think it's super easy to be in the moment and during that time, because you're thinking about the past. You're thinking about what could have been. You think about all these different contingencies. And I think that you shouldn't force yourself to be in the present when you need to process what happened in the past. I'm not saying that that's an excuse to stay in a grieving period, but I think that it makes sense. Give yourself the space, right? I think another more recent experience that I have is if you have an anxiety attack, it is very difficult to be in the moment, and you might need an additional aid to help you get there. Whether you take rescue medication for anxiety attacks, whether you need to sit and listen to a grounding meditation, sometimes it's not possible to ground ourselves during an anxiety attack. If you can, that's phenomenal, and that's a really great skill, but it is very difficult, 100%, and you might need some additional help. I actually will link my favorite grounding meditation, like SOS meditation, for when I have anxiety attacks that I actually listen to, if I can, in the description, because I think it's helpful. But all of this is to say that there are going to be times when it's very difficult for you to be in the moment, and I don't think you should force it and get frustrated with yourself as much as that's difficult, because it's understandable. This is my entire thought process on the notion of being present, because I think there's a very strong reason that we do not find this to be an easy skill, and yet we covet the concept of it because it seems so serene, because when you do feel that way, it feels very blissful. When I'm in the moment, it feels extremely calming. But it's also fleeting, because then the moment passes and then you're back to your busy day, right? And so it's like, how many times can I have this experience throughout the day and check in and be aware of what's going on? That is how I feel. I want to also take the end of this podcast to just do some life updates. I try to do this at the end of podcasts just because I know that people really want to get into the meat of what the podcast is about, and I want to respect people who have limited time to listen. So this week has been very crazy. We reached 10,000 listens on this podcast, and I'm just kind of like, what is going on? I'm very grateful, and it's funny because when I was planning out this podcast, I actually was in not a great mental health space. It was after I had lost my first patient as a medical student, and I went to dinner by myself. Just give myself some extra grace with some nice food, and I took out a notebook, and I was writing the entire dinner. I just sat there by myself at a fancy restaurant, and I wrote all these ideas for this podcast into this small journal. And I carried it with me for several months. And I started making it happen slowly. I got the podcast cover art, and I got the music, and I started writing down all my ideas for this. And I just really never expected it to be what it is now. And so thank you. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. I can't thank you to the person who's listening. Thank you. Anyway, if you have any concepts for what you would like future episodes to be like, please feel free to message me in my DMs. I have all of my socials listed. You're welcome wherever you would like to be. And I hope that wherever you're at, you have a great rest of your day. I am cheering for you, whatever you're doing. See you next week. Bye.